Hey, what is up guys? Welcome back to another video, and in this video we are going to be continuing on with our C# tutorial series, and in this tutorial we are going to be taking a look at how we can throw exceptions from our own methods. So in this video we're going to use the example of creating a method to read integers from the console. So you know how throughout this series we've been getting integers from the console and having to convert them to integers and all that stuff? Well, we're going to go ahead and create a method that we can use to do that, to do all that for us and reuse that logic. And along the way, it's going to throw a format exception if it cannot convert the string from console read line to an integer. Now, if you looked at the documentation for toInt32, you will notice that this method will throw a format exception if it fails. Now, I don't require that you have read the documentation, but I still highly recommend it, and I will constantly refer back to it throughout the series. But just an FYI, if you did look, you would have seen that yes, it does throw a format exception, and we're going to utilize that today. So let's go ahead and create this method of public static int read integer. Okay, so before we continue, I guess I should probably also talk about what throwing an exception from our own method actually means. Well, that tosses it up through the call stack. So when someone calls our method, they have to catch the exception that we are throwing. Right? It throws the exception onto the call stack, and that exception will keep bubbling and bubbling and bubbling up until someone either catches it or it crashes the application. Okay? So, in our method, let's do our normal logic minus the console.write. So string input and this input is going to be equal to console.readLine, like that. Okay, now we can go ahead and have an int result, or rather, we're going to call it value. So int value, we're not going to give it a value yet. We're not going to give it we're not going to initialize it yet. After we declare the variable of value, we're going to have a try. Okay, and inside of this try block, we're going to say value is equal to convert.toInt32 input. Okay, so now if this toInt32 call throws an exception, if it throws a format exception, we want to catch that. So do a catch. And we can do our catch block. Now in the parentheses, I didn't cover this in my try-catch video, but when you're catching an exception, there are two ways you can do it. You can just type the name of the exception and nothing else, or you can give it, like, you can actually have an object with that exception type if you want to, say, print the message that comes with the exception to the console or something. Or you can throw that object onto the call stack, and that's one way you can throw the exception. Or you can just throw a new whatever the exception is. I'll show you that here. I'll show you that here now. So we want to catch a format exception like this. We're gonna give this an object name. So E. Okay. And inside of our catch block, we would then say throw E, like that. And that works. You could also get rid of this E altogether and just say throw new format exception and give it a opening closing parenthesis. This is we're instantiating a format exception object, and we're throwing that object that we just created. And you could give this a message. So we'll say, so we can say something like, you did not enter a valid integer value. And so the nice thing about throwing the format exception is that if you have a formatted string and it cannot be converted to an integer, so like if you have an integer that's formatted as currency and you pass it in, it will convert it just fine. But if it's say a double converted as currency, that would throw a format exception. Okay, right? If you have a date formatted string, that will always throw a format exception. If you pass it a letter, like an A or a B or a C, something like that, a punctuation mark, a special character, that kind of thing, it will throw a format exception because those aren't integers. Okay? So keep that in mind. What I'm going to do syntactically here is to avoid this long line of code is I'm just going to get rid of the object instantiation here. And I'm just going to say throw E. And do that. I'm going to use the first method I showed you. Throw E, like that. And that works just fine. All right? Because the way we have it now is where we give the exception an object name, and we're throwing that object back up through the call stack. This is how the bubbling behavior works. You just throw it and throw it and throw it and throw it until it gets caught. So this exception is the exact same exception object thrown by toInt32. We're not creating a new one. It's the exact same object. Okay? The exact same exception. So now that we have that done, inside of our try, after we convert everything, right? So after it's converted, we know it's good. We can return value like that. let's go ahead and go to our error list just to make sure. Okay, cool. It's not finding anything wrong with our code. I always find it good practice to constantly go to the error list and check for errors, so that way, you can find them almost immediately. Okay, so now that we have that done, we've thrown our exception. Let's go up to our main method and try it out. Okay, so we can go ahead and say console.write enter a number. And now we can say int value is equal read integer, just like that. But you can see, you can see this isn't exactly how we would want it to go. Now, you can see here that we get an error. It's not going to build. Or rather, it will build, but it's just not going to... when it throws an exception, everything will die. Like, it'll just... it'll crash. So what we need to do then is instead we need to say try int value is equal to read integer catch format exception. And here we're not going to include a name for the object, because all we are going to do let's see here. Okay. Come on, Visual Studio, cooperate. Okay. All we're gonna do is console.writeLine invalid input. You did not enter a number. Okay. Now we can run our code. Okay, we do have a build error. I didn't put a semicolon. All right, so here we are. Let's enter a number, and we'll say A. Okay. Okay, so it looks like. Okay, for a second, my screen reader went out. Let's try this again. Here we are. Do an A. And so you can see now that when we go and input something that isn't a number, it threw the exception, we caught it, and then we output, hey, this is not a valid number. This is not valid input. All right. However, if we run it again, and we get a 5, while nothing happens when we enter a valid number, we do know we don't get the error message. Okay. So we can go ahead and say, if we want to get a message when we successfully convert the value, we can say console.writeLine, you entered and then value. So now we can go ahead and say, run our code. Okay, we have a builder. Okay, let's try that again. Console.writeLine you entered okay. And now let's go ahead and run our code. Go ahead and enter, say, 10. And you entered 10. Now, some very few of you might be wondering, oh, well, okay, you mentioned something about formatted strings. I did. Well, what do you think will happen if we put in, say, a hexadecimal value? Or something of that nature, right? So let's say we put in a 0x0000000, something like that. Now, if we go ahead and we invert our colors again, because NVDA did not speak for me, let's zoom in on this. And we can see, okay. You can see that it didn't really do much. It didn't do what we would have expected it to. And that's because it can't convert like a hexadecimal string like that to an integer. Let's try to run that again. But try, say, a number, sign, E8, E8, E8. And again, that doesn't work either. Right? It will only work, it'll only work with actual like numbers and very specific formats. not like hexadecimal formats or octal format or anything like that. Those won't convert. So just an FYI, if you're thinking, oh well, maybe I can do such and such. I recommend looking into the documentation, looking at different examples online to figure out what exactly the formats are that can be converted using the 2int32 method, which by default will also be accepted by our method here. Right. So that pretty much does it for throwing errors in C#. Thank you all so very much for watching, and we'll see you all in the next one.